January 14th, 1984, Ohio State University Medical Center Ward 8 was supposed to be just another quiet night. Nurses moved between patient rooms, murmuring soft reassurances as machines beeped steadily in the background. In one of the rooms in the neurosurgery wing, 19-year-old Cynthia Ann McGee lay in her hospital bed, recovering from a car crash that could have claimed her life. Despite her progress, a sudden fever had drawn concern. That's when they paged a surgical intern to take a blood sample. At precisely 11:30 p.m., Dr. Michael Swango entered Cynthia's room, his presence as unremarkable as a shadow slipping through a dimly lit hallway. But by midnight, everything changed. A piercing voice over the loudspeaker cut through the stillness. Code Blue, Neurosurgery Wing. Code Blue. Code Blue. Doctors and nurses rushed to Cynthia's room, finding her lifeless body, her skin an eerie, dusty blue. Amid the chaos of hands working frantically to revive her, one person was conspicuously absent. The surgical intern who had been the last to see her alive. That intern was Michael Swango. But tonight's story isn't about discovering the identity of a killer. We already know his name, Joseph Michael Swango, a man the world would later call the Doctor of Death. His weapon wasn't a scalpel or syringe. It was something far more insidious. Poison. And no one was safe. Not his colleagues, not his friends, not even those closest to him. His fiancée, his landlady, the guy he'd share a beer with at a ball game. For 20 years now, Swango has sat behind bars. Yet the mystery that haunts us isn't who he was, it's how many lives he took. Officially, he was convicted of 4 murders, including one in Ohio, but the real number? Investigators fear it could be closer to 60, with up to 7 victims in Columbus alone. To understand how one man could wreak so much havoc, we must go back to the beginning, to the quiet streets of Quincy, Illinois, where Joseph Michael Swango's journey began. Born in 1954 in Tacoma, Washington, Michael was the middle child of John Swango, a career Army officer and Vietnam War veteran, and Muriel Swango, his mother. After his parents divorced, Michael rarely saw his father. Instead, he buried himself in his studies, determined to rise above his circumstances. Although in high school, Swango stood out, not for trouble, but for achievement. At Quincy Catholic Boys High School, he was an outsider, a Presbyterian among Catholics. Yet, he thrived. By the time he graduated in 1972 as valedictorian, it seemed Swango was destined for greatness. Following a stint in the Marines, where he earned an honorable discharge in 1976, Swango pursued his passion for medicine. He graduated summa cum laude from Quincy University and entered Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. But it was there that the first dark whispers began. As a student, Swango took a job as an ambulance attendant. At first, it seemed like a noble way to gain experience, but something didn't add up. Too many patients assigned to him suffered unexplained medical crises. 5 of them didn't survive. His classmates began calling him 00 Swango, a morbid twist on James Bond's license to kill Avon. During medical school, Swango's behavior raised alarms. He forged attendance records, skipped required activities, and narrowly escaped expulsion. When it came time to apply for a surgical internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983, the dean of his school issued a scathing recommendation, warning that Swango lacked the character and professionalism required to be a doctor. But the warning fell on deaf ears. The OSU Medical Center accepted Swango, offering him both the internship and an invitation to pursue a residency in neurosurgery. In the halls of Ohio State University Medical Center, unease was spreading. Patients, seemingly stable, recovering, started to die without warning. Nurses whispered in break rooms, swapping stories of unexplained deaths that always seemed to follow one man, Dr. Michael Swango. In January 1984, administrators took notice. Swango was placed on probation for poor performance, but it was a hollow gesture. He was still allowed to treat patients, and with every patient he touched, danger lurked. One of them was Rena Cooper, but a 69-year-old woman recovering from surgery. Rena would later recount a chilling moment. Swango had approached her fee just before she suffered a sudden, unexplained seizure. When she awoke, shaken but alive, she told anyone who would listen. Swango had injected something into her fee moments before the attack. A used hypodermic needle, discarded in a nearby room, was found. Witnesses placed Swango at the scene. A nurse would never forget the way he grinned. An unsettling, knowing grin as he left. 3 doctors confronted him, demanding answers. Swango, ever the manipulator, denied everything, insisting he had never been in Rena's room. But Rena's roommate had recognized him, and the evidence was mounting. Still, the hospital hesitated, even when Swango brought in extra spicy chicken for his colleagues, many of whom fell violently ill after eating it. He was given the benefit of the doubt. The administration's decision was clear: no investigation, no charges. Swango completed his internship and was quietly let go. Years later, officials admitted the truth. They feared Swango would sue if they couldn't conclusively prove he was responsible for the 7 deaths linked to him. And so, without warning the world, OSU let him walk away as Swango returned to Quincy, Illinois in June 1984, slipping back into the medical world as a paramedic with the Adams County Ambulance Corps. It didn't take long for his deadly pattern to resurface. This time, he brought donuts for his crew. Within 45 minutes of eating them, everyone who had taken a bite was writhing in pain, violently ill. The very next night, Swango and his co-worker Brent Unmissig attended a football game. Swango's conversation took a dark turn. He casually described what he called his dream call as a paramedic, a horrific accident where a busload of children collided with a tanker truck, leaving charred bodies scattered across the scene. It was a nightmare vision that left Unmissig unsettled. Before the night was over, Swango bought Brent a soda. Minutes later, Brent was doubled over, sick. The pattern was becoming undeniable. The crew at the ambulance station, suspicious and scared, decided to act. One night, they faked a call to get Swango out of the building. While he was away, they broke into his locker. Inside, they found 2 bottles of ant poison, one full, one empty. That was enough. They called the police. Armed with a search warrant, officers scoured Swango's apartment. What they found was chilling. More poison. It was the evidence they needed to arrest him. Swango was convicted on 6 counts of aggravated battery and sentenced to up to 5 years in prison. But the damage had already been done back in Columbus. Scathing reviews of OSU's handling of Swango's internship flooded the media. Franklin County prosecutors scrambled to build a murder case against him, desperate to find enough physical evidence to hold him accountable for the deaths that haunted the hospital. But without concrete proof, Swango slipped through their fingers once again. Meanwhile, behind bars, Swango played the part of a model prisoner. He charmed his way into early release after just 2 years. And then, astonishingly, he found his way back into medicine. This time, he landed a position at a medical vocational school in Newport News, Virginia. Swango spun a tale of persecution, convincing his new employers that he had been the victim of a terrible injustice. It didn't take long before the familiar pattern emerged. 3 colleagues fell ill soon after he arrived, so Swango was quietly let go and moved on, slipping from one institution to another. His next stop was a brief stint at a hospital in South Dakota, followed by another at the Northport Veterans Affairs Medical Center in New York. Along the way, Swango adopted new identities, changing his name to Daniel Adams and later Michael Kirk. It was almost unimaginable when Michael Swango, now posing as Dr. Michael Kirk, landed a job at the Long Island VA Hospital in 1993. No one ran a background check. No one noticed the forged documents he submitted. And the results were almost immediate. The day after his first shift, Swango's first patient, Dominic Buffalino, slipped into a coma and never woke up. This was the horrifying pattern of Swango's life. He would appear in one place, a cloud of death and suspicion following close behind. But there were always more victims. While working at the hospital, Swango met Kristen Kinney, a bright young nurse, and the two became engaged. At first, it seemed like he had found something resembling normalcy, a future, a love. But soon, Kristen's world began to unravel. One night, Swango's dark past came to light on Justice Files. A cable television show that detailed his history of poisonings and mysterious deaths. Kristen, though shaken, stood by him, at least for a while. But over time, a nagging fear grew within her. Was Swango poisoning her too? Her body seemed to betray her, racked with relentless migraines. She began to suspect the man she loved was slowly killing her. And on July 15, 1993, her life came to a tragic end. Kristen was found dead in a Virginia park, a gunshot wound to the head. Beside her lay a suicide note, a haunting testament to her grief. Kristen's mother later revealed that her daughter's hair had been tested for toxins. Arsenic was found. Swango had been poisoning her all along. Swango's recklessness only grew. On September 29, 1993, he was assigned to care for Baron Harris, a 60-year-old cabinet maker recovering from pneumonia. At first, Swango appeared professional, but things quickly took a sinister turn. He administered a sedative to Baron that sent him into a coma overnight. When Elsie Harris, Baron's wife, questioned Swango about it, he smirked and said, "Gee, I hope it wasn't anything I did." But that smirk carried a chilling truth Swango knew. He coldly told Elsie her husband would never wake up, and a month later, Baron Harris was dead. With suspicion mounting, Swango fled, not for the deaths he left in his wake. There was still no hard evidence linking him to them. Instead, authorities pursued him for lying on his job application to the VA hospital as Swango vanished. In a bold move, he reappeared halfway across the world, landing a job at a rural hospital in Zimbabwe. Death followed. Patients began dying mysteriously under his care. But without autopsies, there was no proof. Swango's charm and intimidation worked once again. He hired a lawyer to silence the hospital's suspicions, threatening them with legal action. But the truth was harder to suppress. His landlady, a widow, fell. At the suggestion of a local surgeon, she sent a sample of her hair for testing. The result? Arsenic. Swango had struck again. This time, the FBI and Interpol took notice, and the net around him began to tighten. Swango fled Zimbabwe, crossing into Zambia and Namibia, picking up temporary medical jobs wherever he could. But the walls were closing in by 1997. Swango was running out of places to hide. Desperate, he used a fake regime to apply for a position at a hospital in Saudi Arabia. But this time, the US government was watching. They knew his moves and waited for him to make a mistake. And in an act of sheer arrogance, Swango gave them exactly what they needed. He returned to the US to renew his work visa, believing he could slip in and out without anyone noticing. But authorities were ready as Swango waited for a layover flight at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. US Marshals moved in. This time, there would be no escape. They nabbed him, finally ending the long, horrific journey of the Doctor of Death Justice. Finally caught up with Michael Swango. But it came far too late for many. The authorities only managed to pin Swango down for lying on his federal application, giving them 3.5 years to unravel the web of death and deceit that stretched across multiple states and continents. In their pursuit of the truth, prosecutors ordered the exhumation of 3 patients' bodies, and in all of them, traces of poison were found. They uncovered evidence that Swango had injected Baron Harris with a paralytic disguised as a sedative. The investigation also revealed the grim truth about Cynthia Ann McGee, the young woman he had treated during his internship at Ohio State University. Swango had lied about her cause of death, claiming heart failure, but in reality, her heart had been stopped by an injection of potassium, administered by Swango himself. Just days before his scheduled release from prison for falsifying records, prosecutors finally had enough evidence to charge him with multiple murders. Swango was officially indicted for the deaths of Cynthia Ann McGee and 3 patients from the Long Island VA hospital: Thomas Samarco, George Ciano, Aldo Ciano, Aldo Serini, and Baron Harris. At the same time, Authorities in Zimbabwe charged Swango with poisoning 7 patients, 5 of whom had died. Facing extradition to Zimbabwe terrified Swango, and the threat was enough to force his hand. He agreed to plead guilty to 4 murders to avoid being sent back to Africa to stand trial. Swango stood before the court in New York and confessed to killing the 3 VA patients. Then he was transferred to the Franklin County Courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, where he admitted to the 1984 murder of Cynthia Ann McGee. During the hearings, prosecutors read chilling excerpts from Swango's personal diaries, detailing the twisted joy he experienced while committing his crimes. Swango sat in court, unmoved, his strawberry blonde hair cut in a neat crew cut. He seemed detached from the gravity of the proceedings, only speaking when it was his turn to admit to Cynthia's murder. Today, Michael Swango is confined to the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, where he spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He is now 65 years old, serving multiple life sentences for just 4 of the countless lives he took. From an official standpoint, the case is closed. But even now, investigators believe the real number of victims may be as high as 70, spanning 16 years of unchecked murder, from 1981 to his arrest in 1997. Many families never got closure. In Ohio, bodies of potential victims still lie beneath the ground, never exhumed, their deaths forever shrouded in uncertainty. Some cases, like that of 22-year-old Anna Mae Popka, who died under Swango's care at OSU, ended in civil suits, but no criminal charges were ever filed. The family of Dominic Buffalino, who slipped into a coma on Swango's first day at the VA hospital, expressed bittersweet relief. At least he can't hurt anyone else, they said. But Dominic's death certificate was never corrected, a silent reminder of the justice they never received. And what of Zimbabwe? Authorities there abandoned their efforts to extradite Swango, knowing he would never leave the confines of his US prison cell. But for the nurses and doctors who had worked alongside him, the memories remained. They still remember Swango's face, his cool demeanor, and the syringes he carried like weapons. A predator disguised in a doctor's coat. For those who survived his attempts, the scars run deep. One peasant farmer in Zimbabwe recalled the day Swango strolled into his hospital room, gave him an unexpected injection, waved goodbye, and walked out. Moments later, the man's entire body went numb, leaving him unable to cry for help. Though he survived, the ordeal cost him his leg. He returned home a shell of the man he once was, his wife now shouldering the farm work he could no longer do. There was no compensation, no justice, just the shadow of a life stolen by the man who called himself a doctor for the families, the nurses, the survivors. Closure remains elusive. Swango's legacy is not only the lives he took, but also the lives he left shattered in his wake. As one nurse in Zimbabwe put it, "We will never forget the sight of him walking those halls, his pockets full of death." And so the story of Michael Swango ends, not with relief, but with the haunting knowledge that many of his victims will never be named. In the end, the man responsible for only 4 official murders may very well be one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And while the courts may have closed the book on Swango, for the countless families who still grieve without answers, the story will never truly be over.